Hi and welcome to CSM TAC. I'm Peter Briggs, and today we've got former General James Bashall CBE, who's going to be on the show today. He's going to answer some questions on his time in the Army and his understanding of leadership. I was very lucky to be given a post-martial Army commendation by General Bashall while he was serving, and I was in Senlager, and that experience was a fantastic one for me, and I LinkedIn connected with him, and I asked him to come on today's show, and he's accepted very generously, and so we'll get on with the rest of the show. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining me, General Bashall. Could you, for everyone that don't know who you are, would you like to introduce yourself and what you've done while you're in the service?
Yeah, well, good afternoon and thank you, Peter. It's good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Very, very privileged to be invited to come and answer a few questions you're going to pose me. So for those who've not met me, my name is James Bashall. I served for 34 years in the British Army. I spent most of my service with the Parachute Regiment, which culminated with my command of 2 para. And then I was very fortunate to then command a brigade and a division and mix that up with a range of staff jobs in HR as well as operations. And that all finished with my final job as Commander Home Command in Aldershot, looking after a lot of the recruiting and the G1, the foundations of the Army, as well as Homeland Security.
Thank you very much. And so I've asked you to come on today because you've had such a varied career with such experience with leadership, tours of Afghanistan and Iraq with different types of, so your mechanized brigade in Iraq and then the parachute regiment in Afghanistan, SF obviously in Libya. So you've got a vast spectrum of understanding of leadership throughout the Army, and I'm just really tapping into you to find out what your thoughts are on some of the questions on leadership. And so the first one really is about your approach to leadership and how it's evolved throughout the years. So you started the Army in was it 1984? 84. Yeah. And the world there was different to the world that we were in now. So how has your leadership evolved during your Army career and the tenure and the positions that you've been in?
Well, that's a great question to start with, Peter. So I think for anyone who thinks about leadership, I have the very strong view that leaders are made. They're not necessarily born. And my understanding of leadership, the way in which I've enacted it and the way in which I've seen it enacted by others, is about 2 things. It's about experience, your own experience as you go through your life, particularly in the military, particularly as a leader, and secondly, your own education. And as I've witnessed various men and also women in leadership roles, I think, subconsciously at times taken thoughts from them because they've impressed me, and at other times I've actually kept notes. I've been fascinated by their views and I've witnessed the things they've done. And actually that's not just me looking up, it's actually sometimes looking down. You go on a visit to a unit, as you know I used to when I was in GOC, and you hear briefs from senior NCOs like yourself and they tell you about the things they're doing. Gosh, that's a good idea. I think we should get others to think about this as well. So you learn all the time, you learn. And then of course you learn really, I think fundamentally most of my learning was done from reading. And particularly around the time I went to staff college, we were encouraged to read, or given books to read, and you study history and you think about how others have done things and you relate that. And perhaps there isn't any real secrets to it. Everyone's got different bits of skill sets and application of thought. And it's really you taking what works for you at the time. So you ask about how it's changed. When I was a young officer, I just focused on the tactical level, dealing with human beings and men actually in the parachute regiment, very small platoons. By the time I finished, you've got a much wider leadership cohort to think about. And so your methods and your styles are going to alter, but the principles are still the same. And I said you adapt dependent on where you are and what you've learned as you go along.
What book are you reading at the moment then?
I'm actually reading Obama's book, which is great. And he's very good. I mean, he's very detailed on some of the specifics of US policy, but he's very good at explaining where he came from and why he thinks like he does, shaped on the environment he's grown up in, and then very good also to explain some of the world problems that he had to confront. And this is only his first term. I think that the book finishes towards the end of his first term. So obviously he's writing more, but just gives you a really interesting perspective on Russia, on China, on terrorism, on world population, of all sorts of demographic and human issues that he talks about, which is really, I'm fascinated by it.
Fantastic. I'll pick it up.
They do, yeah.
What about, when I was in the service, we often spoke about speaking truth to power and how hard that process was, especially for people in lower ranks. But how do you think that is really going to impact as the army moves forward? And hopefully this, it's a transactional leadership that we're trying to get hold of rather than the transactional of yesteryear. But how do you think speaking truth to power really going to impact on a hierarchical army like the British Army?
Yeah, that's another great question. To me, the truth to power is about you as the leader. One of the most important things you have to do as a leader is set the atmosphere in which you wish to operate. And part of that is saying to your subordinates, this is how I wish you to speak and interact with me. And not in a pompous way, but I mean, for example, ever since I was a commanding officer, I'd always leave my door open to my office. So I could hear what was going on in the adjutant's office or, the outer office, unless I was having a private conversation. And so I said my door's always open, and it literally, physically always was. I always used to say to people, please tell me what I don't know. Imagine I'm an empty vessel. I'm filled with what I see and what I hear. And if I can't get out and about visiting units and seeing people, then I'm listening to my staff officers telling me what's going on. And I encourage them to speak honestly and just tell me what they think. Don't worry that I may get, because I didn't anyway, but I would get cross or knock them back or embarrass them in public. I used to say, I will never do that to you. I will never embarrass you in public. Everyone's got views. I want to hear them. So that's me as an approach. And I think that's the way to encourage truth. But, and it's quite a big but, the military still has a culture that is essentially, if you think about it, the military, the reason we have a military is to do the hard power aspects primarily. I mean, there's obviously soft power work, but primarily the military kills people and it breaks things. That's the differential between us and civilian society. In order to do that, the character of the conflict and and more important, the nature of the environment we operate on hasn't changed. It's still brutal. It's still incredibly tough at times. It's lonely. It's violent. It's very unpleasant. And the military's leadership is attuned to that. It's a hierarchical, you do as I do when I need to do it because we have to get through this. And we have to get through this very unique and difficult circumstance in which we live. And then the rest of the military, or your time in the military, sort of flows from that. And so it's hard to replicate or to alternate perhaps the methods you use on operations into a peacetime, because we are a hierarchical institution by design to allow us to do the hard end stuff that no one else can do. And you can't then change that in an embarrassing environment. So there is a cultural way of the military that looks one rank up, two ranks up. We know what everyone's rank is. You introduced me by using my rank. It's what we do, Peter. It's our, and it does limit sometimes truth to power. It limits the ability of the system. The individuals, not whatever atmosphere I try and set, I still used to sometimes confront long silences. I said, come on, someone's got to have something to say. And people are just used to in the military being told what to do and get on with it and not to ask too many questions. So I think one of the ways around it, which I was reading about, is for, without wishing to be in any way confrontational, you can say to somebody who's given you something, so you can say, for my own education, could you just explain to me why it is you made that decision? Do you can try and find a way to then encourage the leader to then explain if you're nervous about confronting it and think it's a daft decision. So I think primarily, I must say, I'm going to repeat myself slightly here. We are deeply hierarchical by design, and it's in our culture. Trying to get people in the military who served beneath me to tell me honestly all the time was always very difficult. And I'll tell you this story. My final point on this is my old RSM. He used to say to me, the only people who tell you the truth are children and drunks. And so as a policy, I used to attend every party I could, whether it be a company smoker or battalion party when I was, and I can promise you, Peter, it is unbelievable how after a few beers, people start to talk to you.
I'm sure you got a couple of chest pokings.
Yes, of course you do, and you take that. That's a sort of that's what you do. But alcohol does loosen the tongue, and so often, if you want to know what's going on, as I said, go out to socials with your soldiers and your officers, and they'll soon start telling you if they won't tell you in the office.
It's an interesting thought you had there about the leader actually drawing the answer out. So not only are you speaking truth to power, but the leader is actively trying to get you to speak to power. I think that's a really, I hadn't thought about it that way. I obviously tried to get people to talk to me, but I didn't see it as speaking truth to power, if you understand my meaning. It's a very interesting
dynamic. It's the other way around. And I think once you build a team where people trust each other, and I think the military do build very good teams where we all know each other, we know each other's families, we share a lot of hardship together. You form very strong teams. And once you have that creation of that strong ethic, then you get much more lateral flow of information and people happen to talk. And that's why, when I go on visits, when it's often you get very little sometimes when you so you stand in front of an RMP battalion and say, right, and no one says anything.
Yeah.
It's not as if they don't, but they just feel nervous wanting to speak, and that's the hierarchical challenge.
The RSM's waiting for them with a pig stick.
Exactly.
That's what happens there.
You know that,
yeah. Sadly, whilst in the army, I worked with a number of toxic leaders. I worked with a lot of really great leaders. I took a lot from those, and I took a lot from sort of toxic leaders as well. But I also know that the army thrives on doing its business. And a lot of the individuals that I feel like were probably wrong for me as a leader were really good at their job. And so from a certain perspective, those looking down, it worked. And obviously looking up, it didn't. So how do you feel like that could be better balanced in the forces moving forward?
It's difficult, isn't it? And I think there is toxic leadership in all walks of life. It's not just in the military. And it depends how you define toxicity. I would say that the army and perhaps the other two services have largely got a good HR process which selects the right people for the right jobs, largely. And it's not infallible, no system ever is. But as a system for promotions and selection for appointments, it's as good as we're going to have it, given it's based on what you write, the OJR process, or and all of that. And I think largely that people who are selfish, and these are the qualities I would judge to be toxic: selfish, unpleasant, overly aggressive, in it for themselves, overambitious, are largely found out. But there are those who are sort of chameleon in their outlook, and they can, and I'll use a simple word, bluff it with seniors to make themselves look good. But actually they are using people under them just for their own leverage. There are those environments. And I think the way that the military and any institution is going to unpick this fully is just to have honest reporting and absolute integrity in people really writing what they think in these reports, rather than not wanting to rock the boat. And one of the ways, which I find is very helpful, which we've introduced into the army down to about colonel level, I think, is this idea of 360-degree reporting. I'm not sure if you've come across that, but have people tell you privately what they think. I mean, it's not measured, it's a personal thing that you go through to make you a better leader. And to have people privately say to you, you may think you're very clever when you blah, 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 but actually it just upsets people. You know, I found it really useful, really useful.
You've received that, have you, sir?
I have, yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, one of the things they said, I'm not good enough at detail, and it's probably true, and I reflect that. I like big hands, and I like others to do the detail, and so that they felt some of the stuff that clearly, and I respected that I was leaving too much undone and not being precise enough in some of the direction I was giving. And I think 360, I'm not sure how you can, it is expensive, clearly. And we brought it down to about kernel level, I think now, OF5, whether we could bring it lower, whether we could have the RSMs, you know, for example, the senior NCOs, and, you know, I think it's a very useful tool to make you sit up and realize that the effect you think you're having is not actually what's going on. And people will write it and tell you privately. And you also have to choose who you're going to interview carefully. So I think those two things, Peter, are the ways I would think about addressing the shortcomings in some of the qualities of some of our leaders. And I agree with you. I think in the question you asked me, it does impact badly on those underneath. And you can sometimes see a history over sort of several years of someone who has followed someone who's followed someone, and they've got that same trait in their character because they have been brought up that way. And you tend to, in a hierarchy, you tend to behave rather like the person who's in charge of you.
Yes. It's interesting to talk about the 360, sir, because I work at Nelson & Colne College and leadership management, and one of the things that we do on self-awareness is 360 reporting, and we use Johari window and other different ways of getting 360 feedback. And I think that Johari window would be would probably work really well within the military. Which is just a selection of words that you would pick and your subordinates would pick, and whether they align, whether you've got blind or you've got a known quality or characteristic. So I think, and you could probably do that very easily on, say, something like JPA, which you could just click.
No, I agree with you.
Having a full report written, you just select words that befit your manager.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that's useful that we then, you know, some of the things you learn outside the military, we reinvest into the military. I think it's another later question on that, some of that sort of thinking. Yeah.
Fantastic.